Sometimes I'd like to smack old age right in the kisser. Ow!
I always get the best parking spot.
I think she needs a little more help.
Monday?
What I really need is a boyfriend that can drive at night.
I can make a fashion statement out of anything.
I will be fabulous.
I have a little crush on my pharmacist.
With ComfortCare at your side, you can live your best life possible. We know families can't be there 24/7, which is why we can help with as much or as little home care as you need. From medication reminders and meal prep to everyday chores and errands, so you can live in your own home on your terms.
I won't let aging stop me from being me.
Call ComfortCare now and let us create your personalized care plan and find the perfect caregiver match.
Can you show that number again? She was texting.
Together with ComfortCare, you can both live your best life possible.
Call ComfortCare at 503-636-0417. You're listening to Aging Today, the podcast where together we explore the options to aging on your terms.
When I get older, losing my hair, many years from now, will you still be sending me a Valentine? Birthday greetings, bottle of wine. If I've been out till 2:45, would you lock the door? Will you still need me? Will you still feed me when I'm 64?
And now the podcast where together we discuss proactive aging on your terms, connecting to the professional advice of our special guests while creating better days throughout the aging process. Now here's your host, Mark Turnbull.
And welcome to our podcast, Aging Today. I'm delighted to be your host on Aging Today. This is the podcast where together we do explore the many options to aging on your terms. Before we begin today's show, I do want to thank our show sponsor, ComfortCare Home Care of West Lynn. The caregivers of ComfortCare support seniors and their desire to remain independent in their own homes. ComfortCare is helping you to live your best life possible. Well, as many of you know, we are switching over our format from a radio/podcast to a straight podcast now. And in that transition, we've also changed the name. And I do want to remind our listening audience that our name now will be moving forward is Aging Today, as opposed to Aging in Portland. We're broadening our scope, and we're very excited about that. And you can still reach out to us. Here is my email, and I want to hear from all of our listeners out there. This is your host, Mark Turnbull, and all you have to do is email me at mark@agingtoday.us. That's simple, mark@agingtoday.us, and I'd love to hear from you. Many of you have written me in the past and have shared that you might have some topics that you'd like us to cover. We are delighted to entertain any of those topics along the way. And then for those of you that want to, tune in to our past broadcasts, we still have our website up. The website is agingtoday.us, www.agingtoday.us. And you can also use the old address, and that is aginginportland.com. So there's a couple of ways that you can get to our archives. We have over 4 years of shows in the past and many, many topics, and we're going to keep adding to those topics moving forward into the future here. Well, as many of you of our listeners know, and if you're a first-time listener, this is a show about aging. And we always say that if you're not too busy being born, you're too busy aging. And we are aging at various levels. And this is a show for any age group because we're all in that process. And as we traverse this earth, we have a very strong belief system here, and that is that we all are aging on this planet together. We have a story to tell. Doesn't matter how long that story is, whether it's 1 year or 101 years. We all have a story that is evolving. And, it's interesting. What I love about stories is that stories do a couple of things for us. Number one, they nourish us. And we hope to find in each other's stories something about ourselves, something about other people. And stories have a tendency to nourish us. They also have a tendency to shed light on our own personal lives. We learn our most important lessons through story. Story deepens all of our most important lessons, and stories tell us who we are, why we are here, and what we are to do while we are on this planet. Doesn't matter how long. Stories give us our best answers to all of the life's big questions and to the small ones as well. If you want to get to know someone, we always say you need to know their story. Well, today's guest, we're going to find out her story. It's an amazing story. And I am just delighted to have Elaine Sanchez on as our guest today. Elaine, welcome to Aging Today.
Thank you, Mark. And I love what you say about stories. I just couldn't agree more. Thank you so much for inviting me to be a guest.
All right. Well, you've got an amazing story, and I know our listening audience is going to be very excited to hear all that you have to say. And, it sounds like your story revolves around the theme of caregivers and helping people to find hope, humor, and heart inside of caregiving. Is that correct?
You nailed it. It's exactly correct.
And tell us, let's dive a little bit into your background. You're not only an author, you're a speaker, but you always weren't an author and a speaker. You're going to tell that story of how you got involved in all of that. But tell us a little bit about your background and what led you to writing a book. And because we're going to talk about that today, Letters from Madelyn. And so let's start with your background.
Okay. Well, on October 30th, 1993, I picked up the ringing phone, and it was my mother. And she said, "Your father's had a stroke." And knowing that this was his worst fear, I said, "How bad is it?" And she said, "Oh, it's really bad. The right side of his face is all lopsided and droopy. He's completely lost the use of his right hand. He's having a terrible time walking. And when he speaks, I can't understand a word he says." So that was the beginning. I think in 1993, there were very few services for seniors, and I don't think there were any for caregivers. As a matter of fact, I don't think that was even a word yet, because when I first started writing and talking about caregiving in 2004, there was still some question about, is this one word, two words? Is it a hyphenated word? How do we really define this?
That's funny that you say that, because when we got into this line of work about 8 years ago, we were struggling with that very same thing. Is it one word or two words?
Right. I mean, so there just weren't the services and the resources that there are now. So I just kind of want to paint a picture for you of where the book came from. So my mother's name was Madelyn. My dad was Quentin. And Madelyn was 70 years old when Quentin had his stroke. And she was losing her vision due to macular degeneration. Her back was hunched with osteoporosis. She had had open heart surgery, which left her with a scar from her throat down past her breastbone. And she had not fully recovered from that. She didn't sleep at night because of her restless leg syndrome. But the thing that was frustrating her more than anything else was the severe hearing loss that had been brought on as a result of the medication that she was taking for her heart. And so now they lived on a farm in Kansas, and she had two choices. She could either take Quentin home from the hospital and take care of him herself, or she could sell homesteaded farm ground, which would put my brother out of business. And if she sold that, that was their primary asset. And then she might not have anything left to take care of herself. So she had to develop some unique coping strategies to help her deal with her isolation, her loneliness, and the emotional stress of caring for a man who was now very, very different from the husband that she had known and loved for 51 years. And one of the ways then that she handled her stress was she would just go to her typewriter, disengage her emotional monitor, and she wrote letters to me, Mark, in which she expressed everything she was experiencing and exactly how she felt about it. And are you old enough to remember the television series MASH?
Oh yeah, every night.
Yeah.
That's how I got through college.
Isn't that? I know. I love
3 times a day.
So my mother's letters kind of reminded me of an episode of MASH. There was always something that made me laugh, something that made me cry, and something that made me believe it was possible to find hope even in the worst tragedies, losses and depressing situations. And so I saved those letters. I knew that she wouldn't live long. I mean, I didn't expect her to live long. And I thought, well, when she dies, I will still have her letters. And so I saved them. And I just had them in a big cardboard moving box that my husband had labeled Letters from Madelyn. And so it was 2004. I was asked to speak at our church on Mother's Day about mother-daughter relationships. And I decided, I want people to know who my mother had been in her own words. And so I went out to the garage. I took down the box, that my husband had labeled Letters from Madelyn. And there was one letter in particular that I was looking for. And I started reading others, while I was looking for that one because I couldn't remember exactly the year. And I thought, man, this is just a treasure trove. But I found the letter. And I spoke for maybe, 15 minutes at church. And I read a couple excerpts, told a couple stories, and then people came up to me afterwards and said, you have to write a book. And I said, you're right, I do. So I started on it the next day. And this was before you could scan, and copy and paste and all of that. So I just retyped, I just read through them, put them in chronological order, and then I just retyped anything that made me laugh or made me cry. And then my manuscript was about 3 feet tall. And I spent another year cutting it down. And then I took it to a friend who was, who understood the publishing business. He said, it's too long, it's too hard, cut it by 40%. So I did. I found an agent who loved the book, and she could not find a publisher. Everybody said, caregiving, it's a depressing topic. Nobody wants to read about caregiving. And so I decided to self-publish. And at that time, it wasn't like you could do print on demand. So I printed 2,500 books. And then it was like, oh man, now I've got to figure out a way to sell these books.
Yeah. How did you do that?
I started speaking to small caregiver support groups, book clubs, service organizations, anybody who would give me a spot at the front of a room. And then, I started speaking about anger, guilt, depression, grief, dementia-related challenges, and self-care. And it evolved. I mean, in the beginning, I was just kind of doing a book review, and sharing stories. And then I got paid to speak at a conference in Wisconsin, and I hired a videographer to come out and record my keynote. And from that, I started a YouTube channel. We built a website, and I created the program, I called it at that time Caregiver Survival Training. And that came about because I was on a plane on my way home one night, and from a speaking engagement, and the man seated next to me, asked me what I did, and I told him, and he said, oh, so if I went to your website, if I were a caregiver and I went to your website at 3:00 in the morning because I was absolutely desperate for some emotional support to help me get through a sleepless night, but I find it on your website. And it was like I had been gut punched. It's like, no, you wouldn't. It's all about me. It's all about my book. It isn't about caregivers. And that's kind of where that was the moment that everything shifted. Mm-hmm. And it has just grown since then. And I would have never dreamed in a million years that this would become my life's passion and my life's work. And it has. And it's just been an absolute joy to me.
Yeah. And it sounded like it chose you, and you responded to the call.
You are so right. You are so right, because people would say, why did you decide to do this? And I said, I didn't. I think it was a God thing. It's like, it was like I didn't have a choice.
Yeah.
And it's something that I willingly did, but, yes, I think I was chosen for it, and it's brought me so much joy.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I didn't really choose this, this line of profession in this modality. Mm-hmm. However, my background is in the pastorate and taking care of people spiritually, and so now we're just taking care of people physically and spiritually. So it's a natural progression, but I never thought I'd be there. Working with seniors and the aging process, right. like we are, and it sounds like you feel the same way.
And you have heard some amazing stories yourself, haven't you? Absolutely.
Yeah. And the best part about what we do is just that right there. We mm-hmm. get to hear life stories, mm-hmm. and I find people fascinating. Mm-hmm. They can drive you crazy sometimes. I wake up and I go, if it wasn't for people, this would be a really fun business. There's those days, right? We have those days.
Yes.
But overall, I just love meeting people and hearing their stories and let them tell their stories.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You are so right. I'm just right there with you.
Well, and so let's dive into the book a little bit. So this is a series of letters that your mom had written to you, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And so if there was one constant theme that winds throughout the book, Letters from Madelyn, Chronicles of a Caregiver, what would that mm-hmm. one central theme be?
That is really a great question. And I can just summarize it for you very quickly. She believed that as long as she had the ability to read and think, she would have the power to choose her attitude toward any person, situation, or event. And it was an interesting thing how she got to that point, and that would go back to the year 1960. And that year, as I mentioned, we lived on a dairy farm, and we raised wheat, corn, milo, all of those crops. And there was, I had 3 older brothers. There were 4 of us kids in 5 years. So you had all of these children, so much work, never any money. But in 1960, we had prospects for a really good wheat harvest. And then, as it does in Kansas, storm clouds started building up in the southwest, and we had a hailstorm that went through in about 15 minutes or less, but it destroyed all of our crops, and they're a primary source of income for that year.
We'll hear more from Mark Turnbull and his guest Elaine Sanchez, author of Letters from Madelyn, in just a moment, as they discuss helping people to find hope, humor, and heart inside of caregiving. Here on Aging Today.
Did you know that stress is responsible for a multitude of dementia-related challenging behaviors? It also contributes to numerous physical ailments experienced by caregivers, including tension, headaches, backaches, and digestive disorders, just to name a few. There are 3 stages of stress. Stage 1 is alarm. Something happens that is perceived as a threat. That triggers the fight or flight reflex. Heart rate and blood pressure increase. The adrenal gland releases cortisol, and the body receives a boost of adrenaline which spikes energy. Stage 2 is resistance. After the initial shock of a stressful event, the body attempts to normalize, but it remains on high alert. If nothing else happens to cause stress, hormone levels, heart rate, and blood pressure return to a pre-stress state. During this stage, a person feels frustrated and irritable and has difficulty concentrating. People with Alzheimer's and other dementia-related disorders often reach stage 2 in the late afternoon. This period of time is often labeled sundowning. They might start pacing or following you from room to room. They can become uncooperative, agitated, and angry to the point of being combative. These behaviors create additional stress for the caregiver. Without having an effective strategy for de-stressing, tension between the caregiver and their partner can escalate. After repeating this pattern over an extended period of time, both partners end up in stage 3, which is exhaustion. At this stage, caregivers will experience physical and emotional fatigue, anxiety, and 50% will become ill or depressed. Understanding the short and long-term impact stress has on both the caregiver and the care receiver is the first step in recognizing the importance of self-care. There are strategies for avoiding and de-escalating stress, and incorporating them into your daily interactions may be easier than you think. This Did You Know moment is brought to you by Comfort Care Home Care of West Lynn. Call today at 503-636-0417.
And now, more from Mark Turnbull and his guest, Elaine Sanchez, author of Letters from Madelyn, and our theme, helping people to find hope, humor, and heart inside of caregiving. Let's rejoin them now on Aging Today.
That was the year that my mother realized she hated the farm. She hated everything about it. She hated the cows. She hated the flies. She hated the smell. She hated being poor, but she loved my dad. And so she did 2 things that summer that really changed her life. She got a job in town, and she became a devotee of self-help books. And the one book that really changed her life was Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning.
Oh, it's one of my favorite books.
Yep. So, Dr. Frankl was a survivor of Auschwitz, Nazi concentration camp. And the one thing that really struck her was when he talked about, it wasn't always the youngest or the strongest or the healthiest people who were surviving the work camp. It was, he said, attitude made the difference. And he said, you can take away every single choice a person has, every single freedom, except for the last freedom, which is a person's freedom to choose his or her attitude toward any given set of circumstances. So I think she hated her physical life so much that she developed, he became her hero, right? And she thought, okay, I cannot control the weather. I will never have any influence over what we get paid for our crops, but I can control my thinking. And so she had a lot of practice, over the next 3 decades, raising 4 kids, living on a dairy farm. But she had developed that skill through all of those years, so that when she became my dad's caregiver, she already had that ability. And so, she would wake up every morning and she would just pray that she would be a willing channel for God's love and caring. And some days she did. And then other days she said, I would just feel like telling God to go find himself another servant, that I am just done with this.
Yeah.
So she struggled. I mean, she was not a saint. She struggled. She lost her temper. She yelled at him one time. She said, I'm not at all proud of myself, but I met him at the back door last night hollering, if you have another stroke, it had better, by God, kill you. You know. and she meant it, you know, because she was dealing with what I now call the 3 F's of flipping out.
Okay, and what are those 3 F's?
They are fear, frustration, and fatigue. And she was, my dad insisted that he could still do some things that he could do before he had the stroke. And they had a fire in the wheat field, and he had gone out, he had gotten on a tractor and plowed a fire break, and he came in late. And she was convinced that the reason he had the first stroke was because he had worked too hard, too long, and just wore himself out the year before. So so she was afraid that he would have another stroke and it could kill him. And at the same time, she may have even been more afraid that it wouldn't kill him and it would only disable him to the point where she could no longer take care of him.
Yeah.
And
that's the greatest fear,
isn't it?
Of strokes. Sometimes, if I had to choose between a heart attack, a fatal heart attack, and a stroke, I'll think I'll take the fatal heart attack. And the reason,
any day.
And the reason
any
why
day.
is because, boy, it's debilitating what strokes do
absolutely.
to you. Yeah,
absolutely. And my dad had stroke-related dementia, and we didn't know that term at that time. But that leads to some other stuff that we can talk about later on. But I think that the second F is frustration. And she would just get so frustrated with him because, she knew what he needed to do to get better, that there were exercises that they had given him to strengthen his hand and lifting his leg so that he could walk better. And he just didn't want to do them. He just, unless the pretty redhead therapist came out to the house, physical therapist would come out, he wanted no part of it. So
right. That's the only motivation of a man is a pretty redhead therapist.
Well, it didn't hurt a bit.
Yeah.
But then he also didn't want to quit driving, and of course, that's always a problem. So that was a big frustration, and then she was exhausted because she had congestive heart failure. He didn't sleep at night. The stroke affected his ability to to lie down and to breathe. And he was up. He also had prostate cancer, so he had incontinence issues. And so she was always exhausted. And so those 3 factors, I think, contribute to caregivers getting angry. And you can completely understand the reason why, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So when I speak at conferences, I talk about that. I talk about strategies for coping with all of these things. And self-care is always at the heart of everything that I talk about. You need to find ways to take care of yourself physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. Be willing to ask for and accept help. I mean, that's one of the beautiful things about Comfort Care, your sponsor. I just think, oh, what a blessing that would have been to us. I was working. I lived. The closest I ever lived to my mother was 500 miles away, and there just were not programs at that time to help. So I was always flying home and trying to line up things and help her. And it's just it's so much better now than it was then.
Yeah. Elaine, one of the things I was thinking as you were telling your story here is that it goes along with what we say in this show, that we're all aging. And what's interesting is that many of us, including myself, really don't take the time to prepare for the aging process. And then all of a sudden, when it springs, the effects of aging spring upon us, it really, shocks us, and it puts us in a place of these 3 F's that you're talking about: the fear, the frustration, and the fatigue.
Right.
And, is there anything in your journey that you can tell to our listening audience, how to prepare yourself for that day, and especially for, those outcomes that just blindside us, like strokes?
Yes, I will tell you that I was the executor for my parents' estate, and then I was also the personal representative for my Aunt Jean. After my parents' death, we in 2006. Sorry. In 2005, my Uncle Frank died, and my Aunt Jean was my mother's only sister, and they had no children. So she was living in Florida, and we invited her to come to Oregon so that she could be close to me and my husband, and we had a lot of kids around, and just said that she would have family. It would be so much easier to help her at age 80 than it would be, for me to be flying from Oregon to Florida to help. And so she did. And after having been through managing and settling my parents' estate, when she got here, I think it was the first week, I said, Jean, I'm going to take you to an attorney because I need for you to get your end-of-life documents in order. Because if I'm going to be the one that's responsible for managing your end-of-life care and your finances and your health care and all of that, I need for you to get those documents in place. Great plan, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
So we did, because I just think it's so critically important to have, the 3 documents that everybody needs is either a will or a trust. You need a durable power of attorney so that if you get to the point that you are disabled, that, there is somebody appointed to manage your finances, and then an advance directive, which names, whether you want life support and tube feeding and all of that. So we got those documents done, and how things worked out would be another complete show, Mark. So I'm not going to go into all of that. But if you don't have those things in place, and if your family doesn't know where to find them or what your wishes are, then it can lead to such disasters at the end of a person's life. You say we are all aging, and you are so right. And do you think that any of us are going to get out of this life alive?
I haven't met that person yet.
I have not either. And so I just think it's a hard discussion. Mm-hmm. It's things that people don't want to face and deal with. But I can tell you, if you don't do it, the impact on the people you leave behind is just horrible. So
the blind side is devastating when you're blindsided like that, and that's what life does. Life, there's enough malevolence out there to blindside you, and for some reason, it's a good trait that we feel like we're invincible and that we're going to live forever. But in reality, that's not the case.
It's just not the case. And, we could have an entire show on this, but I don't want to go that way with it. But I just hope if people are listening, if they haven't done their end of life documents, if you're young, and healthy, make an appointment with an estate, attorney, an estate planning attorney. And I think as people get older, if they anticipate having different needs, then I really recommend contacting an elder law attorney, because they can save you so much heartache and help you preserve, assets for the well spouse. So that may be not what you were expecting, but
No, that's great. That's great. We've had programs on in the past and have encouraged all our listeners to get those documents in order. And it is very, very important. And I know when you're 20, it's not, we're not thinking along those lines. Even in our 40s, a lot of times we don't think that way. And in our 50s, we may begin to think along those lines. But, and only because maybe our parents now are in their 80s. And so it's forcing us to think about those things.
Yes. Yes, and I think anyone who has ever had to settle their parents' estate, you just know that you don't want to make your children go through a lot of trauma. There's a lot of business to ending, wrapping up a life. But so I'd like to go back to the emotions that caregivers deal with, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
So I think one of the biggest issues and the most difficult is guilt. And I talk about how to spot a guilt tripper, how changing your emotional vocabulary can change your relationship with guilt, and how to stop managing other people's feelings. So that's kind of in a nutshell. And I think a lot of us have allowed other people, I can speak for myself, at one point I allowed an ex-husband now to control me through anger and guilt. And one of the things that I've learned about guilt trippers is that they're really good at this.
Yeah, they are good. That's for sure.
They know how to make you feel responsible for their happiness.
Mm-hmm.
And so I talk about, if something bad happens to you, and this person that can only think about, wow, this is going to be really inconvenient for me, chances are pretty good that you're dealing with a guilt tripper. And the thing is, if someone is of that character, you will never be able to do enough, be enough, give enough to satisfy them. They are always going to want more. And so you can't ever expect a guilt tripper to change. So if you're tired of feeling guilty when you haven't done anything wrong, then I ask people to change their emotional vocabulary, and instead of saying I feel guilty, say I regret. So the word guilt would indicate that you have done something wrong, that you have failed in an obligation, that you've been bad. It's a personal failure on your part. And regret, on the other hand, is a sense of sadness and wishing that things could be different. So I'll just give you a few examples. I regret that I sometimes lose my temper and I say terrible things to my care receiver that I wish I could take back. I regret that I run out of energy and I don't always have the physical strength to care for my care receiver the way I wish I could. I regret that I resent the amount of money it costs to take care of them, and that sometimes I think about the price of something before I think about the benefit. I regret that I made promises in the past that I'm not going to be able to keep. I regret that I don't enjoy being with them anymore. There are tons more, but one big one is I really regret that there are some days I wish they would just die and get it over with. But then I say, but I regret a lot of things, but I don't do guilt anymore. So this is a whole process that takes practice. Does that make sense to you?
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. So that's one piece of what I talk about.
We'll hear more from Mark Turnbull and his guest Elaine Sanchez, author of Letters from Madelyn, in just a moment, as they discuss helping people to find hope, humor, and heart inside of caregiving. Here on Aging Today.
Did you know that surprising and inappropriate dementia-related sexual behavior is not unusual among stroke survivors, people living with Alzheimer's, and individuals who take dopamine to control the symptoms of Parkinson's? When a person's 82-year-old husband, who's been wearing adult diapers for several years, propositions his 19-year-old CNA, when a 75-year-old who's confined to a wheelchair from Parkinson's disease racks up a $700 bill on Comcast for porn rentals, or when you go to help your father move your mother into a memory care facility and you discover a bottle of Viagra in his medicine chest, your immediate reactions might be disbelief, disgust, and/or anger. Here's what you need to know. When a person's frontal lobe has been damaged by disease, they lose their ability to understand what is and is not appropriate behavior. The 82-year-old man might not recognize that there is an age difference between him and the cute young CNA. She's cheerful and friendly, and he misinterprets her kindness for sexual interest. When dopamine levels become unbalanced in the brain, obsessive behavior can follow. Sometimes people get addicted to shopping, gambling, or porn. Here's the problem with all of the issues. It's uncomfortable to talk about. Doctors rarely bring it up, and caregivers get so embarrassed, angry, and grossed out that they keep it to themselves. It helps to understand that we are born as sexual beings, and we die as sexual beings. Even diseases as devastating as Alzheimer's won't extinguish that flame within each of us. Tolerance, compassion, and humor can help a caregiver cope. If it gets out of hand, seek help from a geriatric specialist who understands and can provide the psychological and medical expertise you and your care partner need. This Did You Know moment is brought to you by Comfort Care Home Care of West Lynn. Call today at 503-636-0417.
And now more from Mark Turnbull and his guest Elaine Sanchez, author of Letters from Madelyn, and our theme, helping people to find hope, humor, and heart inside of caregiving. Let's rejoin them now on Aging Today.
Another one is grief, and talk about the preparatory grief that, there's grief after death, but then when you're caring for somebody that you're losing gradually to a progressive and degenerative disease such as Alzheimer's or Parkinson's, you're grieving. You're grieving the loss of who they used to be, right, and what they could do. You grieve the loss of what you thought you were going to have at this time in your life, and you grieve the future that you had planned for, because those things are just not going to be possible.
Yeah, I think that's what we've seen a lot with our seniors and anybody aging, and that they find that loss of, well, I never anticipated that, we were going to be this broke
exactly
in our 80s. And we were supposed to live the so-called golden years,
right?
And all of those are huge expectations that we pile upon our shoulders. And then when it doesn't happen, or there's a turn or a twist of fate in our lives, then we struggle with these words that you're talking about: the guilt, the regret, the grief, and the loss of. That it wasn't supposed to end this way.
That's right. And, for people, sometimes somebody gets diagnosed with Parkinson's when they're in their 40s or their 50s. And then all of a sudden, you thought, like you said, you thought you were going to have all of these golden years. So when I was editing my mother's letters into the book, I realized that, I talked to you in the beginning about her attitude, and
I love that. If somebody just tuned in right now, Explain that again about your mom's
Okay.
attitude. The thread,
Okay.
the common thread that weaves throughout this book.
Right. So she said so many times, her mantra was, as long as I have the ability to think and reason, I will have the power to choose my attitude toward any person, thing, or event. So as I was editing her letters, I realized that, that was her mantra, but she actually had a 3-step process. And she, in the beginning, she said that, that she had developed a detached attitude, and that was, this, her ability to detach herself emotionally from the progression of the disease. And then she eventually called it an attitude of creative indifference. And I asked her one time, what's the difference between being detached and being creatively indifferent? And she said, oh, you can call it whatever you want to call it. I just think detached sounds a little cold. I like the term creative indifference better.
I do too. Actually, it's good.
I do too. And she said it just means that, you don't allow yourself to become emotionally ravaged by the disease or the progression of events. So here's the thing that I discovered, Mark, when I was editing her letters. She had a 3-step process, and she didn't know this, but she did it all of the time. So the first step was to name it, and so I called this step becoming aware. And I think there is the best way to do this is to sit down and to write about it. So, you become aware by naming it. So if there is a person, if there's a situation, if there's an event that is upsetting to you and causing you stress, write it down. Just write the factors, write what happened and why it's upsetting you. Now, the second step is acceptance. And this is the hardest part because we have to accept that we're dealing with some incredibly difficult circumstances. And some of these things we can control and some we cannot. And so we have to accept the situation for what it is. And then you go to the third step, and that's action. And there are 2 parts to this. The first part is determining if the problem has a solution. And if it does, then that's amazing and wonderful, because if there is a solution to the problem, you can make a plan, you can execute the plan, and you can move on, right? Mm-hmm. But more often than not, when you're dealing with someone who's aging, disabled, or living with a dementia-related disease, there are not going to be solutions to the problem. So then you have basically 2 choices. And the first one is to obsess over it, think about it all of the time, worry about it, let it wake you up at 3 a.m. every morning, or release your emotional attachment to it. And so I go through these steps with every one of the emotions that I talk about, with the anger, the fear, frustration, fatigue, with the guilt, depression, and grief, and then managing dementia-related behaviors. So I think those 3 steps, though, if anybody is listening and there's something that is really, really upsetting you, just sit down, become aware of it by writing it, accepting that it's difficult and that there may or may not be solutions. And then the third step, of course, is action. Can you change, fix, influence it, make it better? And if not, can you release your emotional attachment to it?
Very good. So when it comes to caregivers, I kind of want to shift gears here a little bit.
Yeah.
Do you have a good working definition of what is a caregiver?
Well, that's a really good question. And I think a caregiver is anyone who is concerned or has to give their time, energy, support to someone who needs their help. And I'm not being very eloquent about this, but I think we have all sorts of different levels of caregivers. So, when I was helping my parents, I was a long distance caregiver. Didn't have that term at that time. I was just going home to help take care of my parents. My mom was just taking care of her husband. Those were the terms. But we have, so many different. Every situation is unique, and every person's care needs are unique, and every caregiver's relationship with that person is unique, and their needs. It's do you have a good definition? Let me ask you.
Well, actually, we put a lot of thought to this, and I was just curious what you thought, and you were right on exactly where we were talking. And how I've come up with my own definition of a caregiver. And it is exactly what you just said. It is someone, and the key word here is spontaneously recognizes the needs of another person. They don't have to be told. They spontaneously recognize the needs of another person and then fulfills that need without ever being asked. And have you ever gone, you've gone to parties, you've hosted parties, right?
Yeah.
And I think, a good host is a good caregiver, because a good host is running around, is constantly surveying the room and recognizing the needs of their guests, and then runs over there with the platter of martinis or coffee or whatever it is they're drinking, or an hors d'oeuvre, and spontaneously recognizes that they're thirsty or they need something in their hand to make them comfortable, and then fulfills that need by putting something in their hand. And that is
so succinct. That's awesome.
I just love that. And as we've talked about this a lot on our show, and that's why we devote a lot of time to caregivers and allowing them to come on and tell their story. Of why they're a caregiver. And one of the common themes or threads that I see amongst the 100+ caregivers that we have on our team, the best ones have that definition right there. They spontaneously recognize the needs of another human being, and they meet it. It's that simple.
Yeah. And, what strikes me is that people who do this well have a tremendous amount of empathy.
Yeah.
And, they have the desire to really help people when they can't do everything for themselves. But I love that. I'm gonna borrow that. I'll give you credit for it.
Absolutely. Well, and really it's our caregivers that, they need to be recognized in our culture.
Yes.
And we haven't done a very good job of doing that in the past. We're trying to change that paradigm and recognize caregivers for who they are and the sacrifices that they make in their own personal lives to care for another human being that cannot care for themselves. Well, as we were talking, 1% of, I believe, in a population are what I call the true caregivers. And those true caregivers are very rare people to find. And they do have some of these characteristics that we were just talking about in the definition of a caregiver, that they spontaneously recognize the needs of other people and then seek to meet those without even being asked to do so. So that's, in a nutshell, caregivers from my perspective, and they're very, very special people.
You are so right. And I just have to add that, if I need a caregiver, I hope there's one like that around to take care of me.
Amen to that. That's what a lot of people ask me, why did you get into this business? And I said, well, I'm not as dumb as I look, first of all. I'm preparing my caregiver as we speak, and
Right.
I get to pick her out or him out or whatever. But I want the best, and actually I laugh at that because there's a little bit of truth. And then also, my parents they're 91 and they're going to be needing care sometime soon. And so we're experts in caregiving, and we want to give everybody, all of our clients, the best of care.
Right. That's awesome. That really is.
Yeah. So I want to shift gears here a little bit and talk about your new program that you're developing. It's a Caregiver Support Group, and I want you to talk a little bit about that and why. What was the motivation behind starting a Caregiver Support Group?
Well, thank you for asking. The motivation actually started with COVID. When COVID hit, all of my conferences for 2020 were canceled. And I just realized that I didn't want to just walk away from my work. And when you can't have a conference and you can't do things the way you've always done them, then you just have to adapt and adjust. And fortunately, I work with a man who is really technically skilled. And I just told him that I wanted to build a production studio and figure out how to deliver keynotes and workshops virtually. So it took us about 3 months to get the setup, and then it took me another 3 months or so to learn how to speak to a camera with the same kind of enthusiasm and presentation style as I used to bring to a stage. And then I started doing some support groups. I did, several keynotes, and I did some workshops and worked with some groups. And I thought, I'm just one person, and I have a limited amount of time. And there are more than 48 million unpaid caregivers in the United States. And it's like, I'm not going to reach all of them by myself. There's no way I can do that. And so I just decided that we would take all of the elements that I've had on my website and all of the, the talks that I have done. And I have a workbook, a caregiver workbook, and we did a facilitator's guide a few years ago, but people were not quite ready then for video caregiver support groups. And I think because of COVID and people learning to use Zoom and all of that has changed. And so we're just in the process of doing that. I'm very excited about it. It will be 10 modules, and we'll be talking about the things that we've already talked about, the anger, the 3 F's of flipping out, about strategies for setting boundaries, and forgiveness as a method of self-care. And then I'll be talking about guilt and a lot of topics around guilt and how you can manage that, how you can stand up for yourself and release the need to manage other people's behavior, and basically just how to stop feeling guilty when you haven't done anything wrong. We'll have a module on depression. So we'll be talking about reactionary depression, which is a temporary state that can be brought on, as a result of getting a bad diagnosis. A pet dying can throw a whole family into a state of reactionary depression. A problem with a relationship, and strategies for self-care to work your way through that. I also talk about clinical depression and how that is a medical problem that manifests in a mental disorder, and the importance of getting medical treatment and care for that. And we go through grief and managing, as we talked about earlier, the preparatory grief and dealing with these ongoing losses and changes, the importance of saying goodbye, of getting palliative care, getting your end-of-life documents in order. And then I talk about dementia-related challenging behaviors, including surprising and inappropriate sexual behavior, triggers, sundowning, and how to minimize, the behaviors that can be so exasperating and frustrating for a lot of people. And then I wrap it up with self-care and strategies for taking care of yourself. So I know this all sounds heavy, but my mother was funny. She was really, really funny. She did not know it, but her letters, sometimes she was just so irreverent and so honest that they just made me laugh out loud. So some of my videos are animated. Some of them I'm telling stories where I put on an apron like she would wear and I become her. And it's so much fun because she had such a big personality, and people love Madelyn, and I just tell her story. So, the idea is to give people some really good tools. And as you talked about, stories that they can identify with so that they know they're not alone, that they recognize that having negative feelings is part of the caregiver's journey and it does not make them a bad person. Mm-hmm. And then give them some tools that can help them really recognize the enormity of the gift that they are giving to others, and to not let this destroy them physically, emotionally, and mentally and spiritually as they go through the process.
Yeah, I think that's very, very important. And is this something that is going to be done through Zoom or through a virtual training?
It can be done either way. It will be available to deliver it in a group setting, mm-hmm. And so it's really video based, plus the facilitator's guide and the caregiver workbook. So I'm doing one now, and we have the beautiful thing about this setup is that you can have people from all over the United States. So in this group we have people from Oregon, from Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, all over the place. And mm-hmm. and so I think it's easy. It'll be easier for caregivers because they don't have to find respite care. They don't have to worry about, mm-hmm. getting somebody to come in or loading their care receiver up and taking them to someplace, So I think it is working really well for the group that I'm doing. And so I just want to make it available to other organizations so they can offer it to their caregivers.
Yeah. And is there a cost associated with these workshops?
Yes, there will be. Although I haven't landed on a price yet. It'll be 10 modules, 10 individual meetings. So it could be, over 10 weeks, or it could be, and they're about 90-minute sessions. Mm-hmm. So they could be shorter sessions if you wanted, or you could make them 45 minutes and do it over 20 weeks. So it's completely flexible that way.
Yeah. Okay. And tell our listening audience where your website is. How did they get there? Because your website, I would imagine, is chock full of all the buttons to push to get to the information that they need.
So the website is CaregiverHelp, HELP.com. Okay. And I do have tons of videos on there. the program that I have, there's like caregiver videos segment on it. All of that is being updated. Most of it is being replaced, but I have, I don't know, a couple hundred blogs, a lot of articles, resources, and a lot of videos. And so I encourage people to go there. They can also go to YouTube, but I think the best site is caregiverhelp.com, and that's all going to be changing a lot in the next few months.
Yeah. And this is for caregivers of all stripes, and
yes.
Meaning that there are professional caregivers, there are family caregivers,
yes.
there are spousal
yes.
caregivers, there's all types of caregivers, whether
right.
you're professional or not. These modules are focused on whatever type of caregiver you are.
Yes, because whether you're a professional or a family caregiver, I mean, we all experience the same emotions, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The triggers are different. So, for instance, when you talk about fear, a family caregiver worries about how bad is it going to get, how long is it going to last, how much is it going to cost, just to name a couple. Well, if you're a professional caregiver, your fear might be making a med error, giving a patient the wrong medication. It could be getting hurt because you might be working with dementia patients who might act out or get violent, if they are upset. Might be losing your job. So, they are very different fears, but it's the same emotion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And we're dealing with people, and
yes,
we, like you said, we all have the same emotions.
Right.
We experience those anyhow, and we're at various stages, and we have different
right.
capacities. Some
right.
of us are better at We're better at dealing with guilt than others, and others need more tools to deal with the guilt, the
right.
shame, the judgment, the depression, the grief, the self-care, all of those things.
Mm-hmm.
Those are really great topics for caregivers, and I'm so glad that you're doing this.
Oh, thank you. So I have my mother's letters, and then there was a lady that's just become a very dear friend. Her name is Dorothy Tucker, and she worked in nursing homes and on memory care units for more than 30 years. And during that time, she kept a journal, off and on, but she shared her journal with me. So I think the thing that made my mother's story unique and Dorothy's stories unique is that they are written in real time. They didn't kind of get through it and then look back on it and reflect. They wrote it, how they were feeling, what they were experiencing, the challenges that they had while they were in the thick of it.
Yeah.
And I think that, sometimes those emotions were really raw, and sometimes things were hysterically funny. Mm-hmm. But all of them were real. And I've also interviewed hundreds of caregivers, through my travels when I've been speaking, and also through my support groups. So, and I've had some experience caregiving myself, from my parents, from my Aunt Jean for 10 years, from my husband through a couple of spinal fusions, really hard back surgeries. And so I haven't personally worked as hard as a caregiver as my mother did, or as a lot of other caregivers, but being a party to it, being a witness to it, I think has given me enough distance from it to be able to talk about it and help others without collapsing myself.
Well, you're spontaneously recognizing the needs of caregivers, and you're meeting it. There you go. I love it.
There you go.
And what better person to do it? And you know what? We're up against the end of the show, and what I'd like to do is to end on this note. I would love it if you could share a story from Letters from Madelyn. Something that was really kind of funny, or maybe it was raw. I love your choice of words and telling it. Your mom told it like it was. And I think that
Okay.
sometimes, we sugarcoat everything, and, life just isn't sugarcoated. It's hard. Life is hard. But inside of that life story, there's a lot of emotion. There's a lot of heartache. There's a lot of grief and pain, suffering. And then there's also the victories. So let's end on a note with a great story from your book, Letters from Madelyn.
Okay, well, I think I will tell you the story that I told at church on Mother's Day 2004, and this was the story that made me realize I needed to write the book. So I want you to imagine that Madelyn is standing at her kitchen window, and she's looking out at this old, empty cow lot. So she's, there are grain bunkers out there and the weeds growing up, and, it's a farmhouse that was first built in the late 1800s, and it's just not the most ideal environment. But she's standing there with her apron on, washing her dishes, because she knows that if she wears her apron, she's not going to get her clothes dirty. She doesn't have to wash them as often, and they don't wear out. And I can imagine that she's standing there washing dishes and then slamming them into the drainer. And at some point, she realized she had two choices. She could either stand there and explode, or she could go to her desk and she could write to me. So this is what she had to say. Dear Elaine, I am so upset over the advice that is being given to people today about doing your own thing and to hell with everybody else. And I bought this book, Your Erroneous Zones, by Dr. Wayne Dyer, and I just got so angry up on my high horse that I just couldn't even finish it. I just had to put it down. And there were two things that upset me about that book. And the first thing is, I don't think Dr. Dyer is aware of the fact that there are two genders. It seems to me he only thinks about the male. And the second thing is he just keeps pounding away at this idea that a person should do whatever he wants to do. Well, as an old lady, I am here to tell anyone who will listen that life is not made up of doing what you want to do. Thank goodness I have learned how to find my own peace and happiness from within. Because to tell you the truth, I can't think of anything that's all that exciting or invigorating about getting up in the morning and fixing breakfast and doing the dishes and starting a load of laundry and picking up the papers and running the sweeper and helping your father, and then going back and fixing lunch and doing the dishes and doing more laundry and more housework and more helping your father. Fortunately, I have learned how to find my own peace and happiness from within, because I can tell you that an exciting day for me might consist of possibly running into somebody I know on the street, or maybe having an interesting telephone conversation. And for this, I should take vitamins. I should eat right and exercise so I can prolong this wonderful life experience. Give me a break. No. I have discovered that having my own peace and happiness from within allows me to stay more or less detached and still do what has to be done to give other people a reasonable amount of happiness. So that was the letter, Mark, that she wrote, and that detached attitude is what evolved into what she called an attitude of creative indifference.
Well, your mom is definitely a character.
Yes.
And I would have loved it. Now, is she still alive?
No.
Okay.
No,
I would have loved to have met her. And I love her, the way she writes. She writes it the way she's feeling it, and the emotions are raw.
Yes.
And she's not going to let anybody else tell her what to think. I love that.
Nope, she doesn't. And it was about 5.5 years into her letter writing when and she knew that I saved her letters. And in one letter, she said, I wish I had been keeping a journal all of these years. She said, I think it would be interesting to see how I have grown mentally and spiritually. And I think maybe other people could benefit from my experiences. And that was, when I read that letter, it was like, okay, she's giving me permission.
Yes.
To do whatever I want to do with these letters. So I, although they are very personal and sometimes very raw, I think I just know she would be so humbled and amazed at how people respond to her experience and to her letters. And I have people write to me sometimes and say, I just ask myself, what would Madelyn do? Or what would Madelyn say to this? And so she was amazing. I feel so fortunate to have had her for a mother.
Well, and we're fortunate that you were able to take and put her letters into the form of a book. Letters from Madelyn, the Chronicles of a Caregiver.
Right.
And the author of the book is our guest today, Elaine Sanchez. And Elaine, what a delight to have you on our show. And we're going to have you back again because we're just tipping the iceberg here. There's more that you have to tell about your story, about caregivers, and more stories to share about your mom.
I would love that. Thank you so much. Thank you for the work that you are doing. I know it makes a difference. And thank you for allowing me to be a guest on your show. I really had fun doing it.
Well, I want you to know that your stories did exactly what we talked about in the very beginning. They nourished us. They shed light on our own personal lives. And we're all better people because of your desire to want to share the lessons and life examples from your mom. And I'm inspired. I love it.
Thank you. All right. Let's talk soon.
All right. And I do want to also thank our show's sponsor, Comfort Care Home Care of West Lynn, Oregon. The Comfort Care team at West Lynn is devoted to assisting you to live your best life possible. This is Mark Turnbull, your host. Thank you for tuning in to Aging Today, the podcast where together we explore the options of aging on your terms. Join us again next week for another lively discussion on aging today. Remember, we're all in the process of aging, and as we age, we really are better together. So stay young at heart.
You make me feel so young. You make me feel like spring has sprung. And every time I see your face, I'm such a happy individual. The moment that you speak, I want to go play hide and seek. I want to go and bounce the moon just like a toy balloon. Well, you and I are just like a couple of tots running across the meadow, picking up lots of forget-me-nots. So you made me feel so young. You made me feel there are songs to be sung, bells to be rung, and a wonderful fling to be fun. And even when I'm old and gray.
You've been listening to Aging Today, where together we explore the options to aging on your terms. Join Mark and his guest next week for another lively discussion on proactively aging on your terms, connecting you to the professional advice of his special guests, with the goal of creating better days throughout the aging process. Your host has been Mark Turnbull. Join Mark and his guests every week on Aging Today, your podcast to exploring your options for aging on your terms.
And even when I'm old and gray, you make me feel the way I feel today. 'Cause you make me feel so. You make me feel so. You make me feel so young. So young. You make me feel so young. You make me feel so young.